It was Tuesday, porridge day. The nuns moved quietly through the hallway before dawn, carrying ladles, folded blankets, and the kind of calm only people of deep faith possess. By 6, their van rolled past the edge of Pine Creek and disappeared into the hills, bound for the remote communities scattered across the western ridge. It was meant to be a day of giving. By nightfall, they hadn't come back. And no one knew why. The sun had barely risen over the sleepy town of Pine Creek, a quiet rural patch tucked deep into the Arkansas backwoods, when the 4 nuns from St. Mercy's Parish climbed into the battered white van parked behind their small convent. It was Tuesday, porridge day, as the locals affectionately called it, when the sisters would travel out to the more remote parts of the county, handing out warm rice porridge and checking in on the elderly, the sick, and those long forgotten by the public welfare system. Sister Mary Ann, the eldest and de facto leader at 62, clutched the clipboard with their route neatly penned in looping cursive. Beside her in the front sat Sister Angela, 34, more reserved but sharp-eyed. In the back sat Sister Claire, just 26 and barely 2 years into her vows, and Sister Fiona, a warm-hearted woman in her 40s with a contagious laugh that even cracked through cold mornings like this one. They left at exactly 6:48 a.m., according to the security camera from the church's back lot. Sister Mary Ann had waved to Father Davis as he stepped out with his coffee, mouthing, "Be back by 6." The route they planned was familiar, through Highway 47, a brief turn onto the gravelly Ridgeview Road, and then a loop around 3 villages before heading back. Nothing unusual, nothing they hadn't done dozens of times before. But by 9:00 p.m., the town's only gas station still hadn't seen their van return, and by midnight the sisters' phones, normally kept off during service, were going straight to voicemail. No one panicked that night, not yet. The sisters were known to lose track of time when talking to locals or helping a family in need. But by morning, Father Davis grew anxious and called the sheriff. Day 2 passed with no sightings. Search parties were formed, volunteers scoured Ridgeview, and the local parish flooded social media with desperate pleas. It wasn't until the morning of the 3rd day that Deputy Kelly spotted the van, abandoned, quietly sitting under a rusted corrugated roof of what used to be Harper's Garage, a long-defunct mechanic station 30 miles from where they were supposed to be. The scene felt staged, though no one said it aloud at first. The vehicle wasn't crashed. There were no tire tracks indicating it had been driven erratically. The front tires sat in perfect alignment with the old gravel entrance, as if parked with care. But the keys were still in the ignition. The back doors were unlocked. The glove box was open. And smeared across the steering wheel and the edge of the driver's seat were faint streaks of dried blood. Not enough to suggest a fatal injury, but unmistakably human. Inside, everything else seemed untouched. Clipboards, bags of leftover porridge, even Sister Claire's small metroble sat quietly on the passenger seat. No sign of struggle, no footprints around the vehicle, no drag marks. As if the woman had simply disappeared. When local reporters arrived that afternoon, Sheriff Darnell was curt. "We are treating this as a missing persons case with suspicious circumstances," he stated. But whispers had already begun circulating. Why would 4 women devoted to faith and charity veer 30 miles off course without a word? Why leave their phones off this long? And most unsettling of all, why that garage? Harper's had been shut down since 2009 after a fire gutted the inside. Locals often said it was haunted, small-town focal room of course, but no one had reason to stop there, especially not 4 nuns on a food run. Back at the convent, Sister Mary Ann's room remained exactly as she left it. A teacup with now stale chamomile sat next to her Bible. Her bed was neatly made. On the nightstand, a folded envelope labeled "For Sunday's Sermon Notes" had been left untouched. Father Davis read her notes aloud that Friday evening during a vigil held in the chapel, his voice breaking on the line, "We must walk in faith, even when the road ahead is veiled." In a town where everyone knew everyone's business, the vanishing of 4 well-loved sisters hit like a thunderclap. Theories sprouted like weeds. Some claimed they'd been abducted by someone seeking vengeance, perhaps someone they had unknowingly helped turn into social services. Others suspected they'd discovered something they weren't supposed to out there in the woods. But amid the murmurs and media noise, it was the silence that rang loudest. Their departure had been routine, their intentions pure. Yet somehow, a stretch of road and a ghost of a garage had swallowed them whole. Sheriff Darnold's office turned into a command center within days of the discovery. Local volunteers brought casseroles, churchgoers donated blankets and flashlights, and out-of-state volunteers poured in after national media picked up the story. 4 nuns vanish in rural Arkansas. Satellite trucks lined the edges of Main Street. The tiny sheriff's department, used to handling minor disputes and the occasional drunk driver, now fielded phone calls from CNN. But even with all the chaos, something quieter, more telling, unfolded a few miles south of the Harper's garage. In the sun-faded trailer park of Echo Ridge, just 20 minutes from the garage by foot, 9-year-old Wyatt Kemp sat on the back steps of his home, chewing the edge of a plastic spoon. His shoes were muddy from the creek, his clothes wrinkled from sleep. Wyatt was quiet by nature, but not shy. He watched the news like other kids watched cartoons and had memorized the names of the nuns: Sister Mary Ann, Sister Angela, Sister Claire, Sister Fiona. He didn't know them well, but he'd seen them once, just last week, walking down Ridgeview Trail, except no one else seemed to remember that day. When he told his mother, she went pale, the blood draining from her cheeks so fast it made her look ghostly. "Wyatt," she'd hissed, dragging him back inside by the wrist, "you didn't see anything. Don't go telling folks what you think you saw. You want trouble? You keep talking like that, and trouble finds you." Then she made him promise, swear it on his grandfather's grave, that he wouldn't repeat it. He tried, but the guilt sat like a stone in his chest. 3 days later, while volunteers passed out missing posters, Wyatt lingered near the sheriff's truck, waiting for the right moment. When Sheriff Darnell stepped outside to light a cigarette, Wyatt approached, chin trembling, voice barely above a whisper. "I saw them. The nuns." After the van, Darnell's cigarette froze midway to his mouth. "Where, son?" Wyatt looked down. "Walking, toward the creek trail. That path past the old quarry." They weren't alone. The boy's eyes darted toward the trees. They were following a man. He wore a red coat, long one, like a raincoat. The sheriff crouched to Wyatt's level, the words hitting him like a slow fever. "Did you see his face?" Wyatt shook his head. He had the hood up. He was pointing to something. They didn't look scared, but not happy either. "Why didn't you say this earlier?" Darnell asked gently. Wyatt's lips trembled. "Mama said I'd bring bad things if I did." The sheriff nodded, standing. He looked out across the gravel, then back toward the woods. He didn't like how fast this was changing. That same night, back at the parish, Father Davis combed through the sisters' personal belongings, cataloging items for the authorities. Each room was a small universe of routine and discipline. Rosaries carefully hung, prayer cards lined up like soldiers, journals stacked near bedside lamps. But in Sister Claire's modest room, he noticed one journal had fallen behind the nightstand, its corner just visible beneath the furniture. He pulled it out, fingers dusted with gray. Most pages were filled with scripture notes and reflections, quotes from saints, her handwriting neat and precise. But the final entry, dated the day of their disappearance, was different. The ink was rushed, scrawled, the pressure uneven. It read, "The man in the red raincoat knows the way in. Do not believe him. God forgive us." No salutation, no signature. Just panic etched in lines. Father Davis sat back, spine stiff. He read it again, then a third time. Raincoat? Red. It aligned too well with the boy's story. He walked the journal to the sheriff himself that evening. Darnell read it silently, then exhaled slow through his nose, staring down at the page like it might change. He waited long enough. "This man, he ain't some drifter, is he?" Davis asked. The sheriff said nothing, but his silence was answer enough. That night, the sheriff pulled old case files from the back room, dust clouding the air. He searched under a different name, Martin Fields, a man once suspected in a missing persons case near the same region in 2003. Last seen wearing a red slicker near the quarry, no charges ever stuck, too little evidence. The file had been closed in 2005. The next morning, volunteers returned to the quarry with canine units, but the terrain was treacherous, and years of erosion had altered the path. They didn't find bodies, no clothing, no signs of struggle, just the creek, the quarry, and silence that pressed down like fog. But back in town, a woman approached the sheriff in the church basement where they'd set up a temporary hub. She was mid-40s, eyes sharp with nerves. "I need to show you something," she said, handing him a folded photograph. It was faded and creased, the kind of picture you hide for years. It showed 4 people, her, a man, and 2 others. The man wore a red raincoat. The date on the back read April 1997. She looked the sheriff in the eye. "He told me he lived in the woods, said he knew a place no one could find." I didn't believe him then. Her hands trembled. Now I think he meant it. The morning after the discovery of Sister Claire's journal, whispers about the red raincoat began to swirl through Pine Creek like smoke through rafters. Rumors moved faster than facts ever could, and already townsfolk were asking why the church hadn't said anything sooner. Father Davis found himself cornered not by journalists, but by his own congregation. During a tense town meeting held in the old parish hall, he stood at the front of the room, sweat collecting under his collar, as townspeople demanded answers. "Why didn't we know they planned to camp?" someone shouted. Another voice followed. "You said they were just out delivering food, so which is it, Father?" Davis took a slow breath and chose his words carefully. "The sisters informed me 2 days before their departure that they intended to stay overnight in the forest near the Ridge Trail clearing. It was part of a silent retreat, a time of solitude and prayer." There was a ripple of confusion. Mrs. Alden, a volunteer who often helped the sisters pack supplies, stood abruptly. "That's not true," she said, voice firm. "They didn't bring tents, no sleeping bags, not even extra water. I saw what they loaded. It was food, some medical kits, and devotionals." "That's all." Davis's lips parted, but no sound followed. Then he looked down and said softly, "Perhaps they intended to borrow from the mission house near Raven's Pass. It's been used before, but that only stirred more unrest, because everyone knew Raven's Pass hadn't been used in years, and certainly not since the forest fires 3 summers ago that left the trail unsafe." His lie, because that's what it was, hung in the air like rot, and people began to leave the meeting early, whispering to one another, avoiding his gaze. Back at the parish, in the quiet of his study, Davis stared at his own reflection in the small mirror above his desk. He hadn't slept in days. The lines under his eyes felt carved with guilt. He hadn't lied out of malice, but to protect the church's name, its dignity, its sacred trust. But deep down, he feared he was protecting something darker. Before he could reflect further, a knock echoed at the rectory's door. It was Sister Therese, the parish's caretaker and administrator, holding a brown paper-wrapped parcel with no return address, her face pale and shaken. "This came by courier," she whispered. "No sender, just this." The handwriting on the front was unfamiliar, jagged, rushed. They took it inside and placed it on the desk. Davis hesitated before tearing the tape. Inside, cushioned in crumpled newspaper, lay a small wooden crucifix, broken clean across the vertical beam. The edges were jagged, splintered. Worse yet, the entire bottom half of the cross was caked in dried red earth, the kind found only in the mountain basin far west of Ridge Trail. Davis picked it up, turning it slowly in his hand, and the scent hit him. Earthy, metallic. He recognized it from his hiking days, long before he wore the collar. That kind of soil wasn't from anywhere near Ridge Trail or Echo Ridge. It belonged to the desolate hills near Devil's Hollow, a no-road zone long sealed off by fallen trees, erosion, and time. "No one goes out there anymore," Sister Therese murmured. "Not since they closed the Firewatch station. Not since that girl." Davis didn't answer. He couldn't. They called Sheriff Darnell, who arrived 20 minutes later with Deputy Colton. The sheriff examined the cross in silence, then bagged it for evidence. "We'll have the lab test the dirt," he said, but everyone knew the tests were just a formality. That soil was as distinctive as fingerprints. "We might need to widen the search zone," he added, but Davis wasn't listening anymore. He stared at the cross, heart hammering. He had seen that crucifix before. A month earlier, during a quiet Sunday prayer session, Sister Mary Ann had left it behind on the pew. He remembered, because the top had a tiny notch missing, like a bite from time. The notch was still there now, visible through the grime and dirt. This wasn't just any cross. It was hers. That night, Davis returned to the sisters' quarters and began going through their rooms again, carefully this time, less like a priest and more like a man chasing ghosts. He checked for camping gear. None. Not a single packable tent, no sleeping pads, no mess kits, no matches. He opened every drawer, every closet. All that remained were prayer books, extra habits, and personal keepsakes. They hadn't planned to sleep outdoors, not even for a night. The lie he told at the town hall grew louder in his ears. They were never going on retreat. They were going somewhere else entirely. In the vestry drawer, he found an old trail map folded behind a stack of hymnals. It was dated 1998, hand-labeled with points of interest in blue ink. One label stood out, Old Fire Post, closed. Scribbled beside it, a note in different ink. Only as soil starts here. He traced the route with his finger, from Harper's garage, through Ridge Trail, cutting across into the forest. The path would have taken them near the closed-off fire zone. No roads, no signals, nothing. That area was at least 12 miles from any major path and hadn't seen official foot traffic in over a decade. Father Davis took the map to the sheriff the next morning. "They didn't go to pray," he said, voice hoarse. "They went out there to find something or someone." Darnell studied the hand-drawn notations, frowning deeper with each second. "Then we've been searching in the wrong direction," he muttered. Deputy Colton leaned in. "That far out, we'll need the forestry boys, maybe even dogs again." The sheriff nodded grimly. "But we keep this quiet," he added. "No press, not yet, not until we know what's out there." That afternoon, as the sun dipped behind the hills, casting the town in gold, a forestry ranger named Whitmore radioed in. "Found something odd west of Firepost Ridge. Old cloth, frayed, like part of a habit. Looks recent. I marked it, but I'm not moving forward alone." The discovery of the torn cloth near the old firepost spurred Sheriff Darnell into action. He assembled a small team of rangers and deputies to begin combing the area, careful not to alert the press or involve state officials, at least not yet. But the deeper they pushed into the western basin, the more resistance they encountered, not from the terrain, but from silence. Trails that were supposed to exist had vanished beneath undergrowth. GPS systems flickered and lost signal. One of the dogs began acting erratically, barking at nothing, refusing to move past a certain point. Within 24 hours, Darnell called for a temporary halt, not out of fear, but out of something colder: calculation. He needed to regroup, assess what they were really walking into. Then, just as the maps were being spread out again for a second attempt, the call came in. It was from a man named Melvin Grant, the retired mechanic who used to own the now-defunct Harper's Garage where the van had been found. He'd left town years ago, but someone had tracked him down in a trailer near Fort Smith. His voice on the recorded line was nervous, halting, but clear. "I think I know what happened to those nuns," he said. "Back when I ran the shop, there were people, quiet people, who came through there. They didn't fix cars, they asked about the trailheads, paid cash, said they were keeping the old ways alive. One of them wore a red coat even in summer." The dispatcher pressed for more. "Can you come in?" she asked. There was a pause, then Melvin replied, "Give me 2 days. I want to gather what I got. Pictures, notes, just tell the sheriff I'm not crazy." The call ended there. But Melvin never showed up. 2 days later, when deputies arrived at his trailer, the place was empty. No sign of struggle, but everything was gone. Papers, clothing, even the framed photos from his kitchen wall. The refrigerator still hummed. A cup of coffee sat half full on the counter, cold. On the kitchen table, a pack of matches lay beside a torn envelope addressed to D. Darnell. It was empty. Sheriff Darnell stood in the doorway for a long time, staring at the scene. He knew the signs. This wasn't a man skipping town. This was something else. And it confirmed what he'd suspected. Whatever had happened to the sisters wasn't an accident, and someone was determined to erase the trail. Back in Pine Creek, parishioners were growing restless, and county officials were demanding transparency. When it became clear that the sheriff had halted the western search without reporting it through proper channels, the district board stepped in. Within 48 hours, Sheriff Darnell was placed on administrative leave, pending review of procedural misconduct. The announcement came without ceremony, a folded notice delivered by a stiff-faced county representative, and suddenly, the only man truly chasing the truth was out of uniform. But that night, Darnell sat alone in his kitchen, files spread out on the table like a war map. In his private notes, never submitted to any official report, he had scribbled in blunt, slanted ink, "Search halted. Not by us. Warning given on ridge trail marker etched into stone. Stay away. They do not forgive trespassers. Proceeding would risk lives." The warning hadn't come via phone or anonymous letter. It had been carved into the old trail marker post on the first day of their mountain search. Deputy Colton had found it beneath a layer of moss, freshly scraped, the letters deep and deliberate. Darnell had taken a picture before ordering the team back. It was still on his phone, dated and geotagged. He hadn't told anyone, not even Colton, what else he'd seen that day. A figure high up on the opposite ridge, barely visible through the pine, standing still, watching, wearing red. Now, days later, and no longer bound by badge or bureaucracy, Darnell reviewed Melvin Grant's last call again. Something about the way the old man had said, "keeping the old ways alive," lingered in his thoughts. What old ways? Why would that matter now? And why would anyone care enough to make a man disappear? Meanwhile, Sister Therese, working quietly behind the scenes, sorted through archived church correspondence and came across an old letter from 2006, filed with other missionary records. It described a retreat group operating near the same western mountains, a group that had once sought permission from the diocese to conduct off-grid spiritual reflections. The request had been denied. The reason? The land in question had been under suspicion of cultic activity in the 10N 980S. No follow-up was ever recorded. The letter was signed only with initials, MF. Sister Therese didn't know what that meant, but Darnell did. Martin Fields. The red raincoat, the one who knew the way in. He made a note in his private logbook. It's a web, the parish, the forest, the silence. All connected. As he closed the file, his phone buzzed. It was a restricted number. A voice spoke on the line, low and clipped. "Stop looking," it said. "They chose to go. Let them stay." Then the line went dead. Even without the badge, former Sheriff Darnell continued to work from the shadows, piecing together the fragments left behind. But he wasn't alone. News of his suspension stirred curiosity in those who'd been quietly following the case, including a freelance investigative journalist named Lee Marsden. She had covered unsolved disappearances before, always drawn to stories that didn't sit right with official narratives. The Nun case in Pine Creek was precisely the kind of story she couldn't ignore. By the time she arrived in town, public interest had begun to dwindle, the headlines shifting elsewhere. But Lee wasn't interested in headlining. She was interested in the quiet details no one was chasing anymore. Armed with her camera, notebook, and a healthy distrust of authority, she made her way toward the western ridge on a foggy October morning, hoping to retrace the reported trail from the abandoned Harper's garage to the old fire zone. She had studied old maps, read obscure missionary records, and had a hunch that no one had gone far enough west, especially not into the dry ravine where the old waterway once flowed. It was there, among the sharp rocks and brittle weeds, that she noticed something unnatural wedged between two stones in the shallow bed of the dried-up creek. A torn canvas satchel, coated in grime and weathered by time, barely visible against the rust-colored stones. Lee crouched and carefully pulled it free. The zipper was rusted shut, but with effort she managed to force it open. Down inside, among decaying threads and debris, she found a folded cloth handkerchief with a faint monogram, M.Y., Marianne Whitehall, the eldest of the missing sisters. Beneath it she discovered something more damning, a library card, partially shredded but legible. The name printed in elegant font read, Sister Marianne Whitehall, St. Mercy Parish. Lee's pulse quickened. This was the first concrete evidence tying any of the women to the interior of the western zone. She carefully sealed it in a plastic sleeve, but something about the bag's weight felt wrong. She shook it gently, and a thin, waterlogged paper fell loose from the torn lining. It was yellowed, brittle, and folded into quarters. She opened it slowly, revealing a detailed hand-drawn map with annotations written in pencil along the margin. At the top, in faded ink, were the words, Tranquilla Mission Grounds, E.T. 1982. The map outlined trails leading deep into a secluded valley beyond Devil's Hollow, marked with symbols, crosses, cabins, altars. In one corner, a note read, "Main compound, sermons at dawn. No outsiders past the ridge." Lee had never heard of Tranquillum before. A quick search later that night, using archived local news and a few declassified government memos, revealed it had been a short-lived missionary enclave operated by a breakaway sect affiliated loosely with the church in the 1980s. Officially, it had been shut down in 1989 following multiple allegations of coercive evangelism, unauthorized construction, and suspected violations of state land use. One memo bluntly labeled it, "Potential site of religious extremism and illegal detainment practices." The government had bulldozed the outer structures but never confirmed what lay deeper in the woods. No charges had ever been brought. The entire matter was buried at deep headlines under Darnielle through a mutual acquaintance at the diner. She showed him the bag, the library card, and, most importantly, the map. His reaction was immediate and grim. He remembered the name Tranquillum. During his rookie days, the older deputies referred to it as the Silence Beyond, a place whispered about but never visited, and the unspoken rule was simple: don't go there. Now, with this map, the silence was cracking. Darnell scanned the notations on the parchment, recognizing familiar topographical features: the ridge, the twin pine marking the pass, and the curving descent into what the map labeled simply Sanctuary. His jaw clenched. If they made it here, he said quietly, they were following someone who knew this place. This wasn't an accident. Meanwhile, Lee contacted the Arkansas archives and requested sealed court records from the late 80s. 3 days later, she received a heavily redacted file that mentioned an investigation into Tranquillum. Key excerpts described reports of isolation chambers, forced baptisms, and sudden disappearances of members who tried to leave. No bodies were found, and no formal charges ever filed. The investigation was dropped for lack of cooperating witnesses. But among the sparse documents was a list of known associates, including one name that had been circled in blue ink: Martin Field. Lee connected the dots faster than Darnell anticipated. "He didn't just know the way in," she said. "He lived there. He helped build it." That night, a storm rolled in, hammering the town with sheets of rain and howling wind. Power flickered. Father Davis returned to his parish office to find a small envelope slid under the door. Inside was a single photograph, blurred, grainy, but unmistakable. 4 women, clad in dark habits, standing in a clearing surrounded by crude wooden structures. The photo looked recent, scribbled on the back, "Tranquillum lives." The rain continued for 2 more days after the photo arrived, and by the time the skies cleared, a cold front had swept across Pine Creek, leaving the trees bare and the roads slick with damp leaves. Inside the church's rectory, Father Davis stood in the archive room holding the newly delivered photograph in one hand and a magnifying glass in the other. He had spent hours going through photo albums, prayer logs, and outreach rosters, desperate for any link between the women in the photo and Tranquillum's history. Lee's findings had rattled him. The idea that Sister Marianne and the others had entered a place with a known history of coercion and silence, and that they may not have been the first, turned what once felt like a tragic anomaly into something more methodical. As Davis scanned a dusty album marked Outreach 1997, an elderly man named Vernon Hadley shuffled in, cane in hand, eyes sharp despite his years. He was a lifelong member of the parish, one of the oldest residents of Pine Creek, and someone who rarely spoke unless it mattered. "You're looking for ghosts," he said quietly. Davis looked up. "Excuse me." Vernon tapped the album. "That year, 1997, I remember it well. A group of volunteers from out of state came through. Young folks, mostly. Said they were on a mission trip. Had supplies, food, medicine. Same road your girls took?" Davis narrowed his eyes. "What happened to them?" Vernon's mouth tightened. "They never came back. Van was found weeks later, off a deer trail near the same damn ridge. Authorities blamed a flash flood, said the current must have carried them off. But it didn't rain that week, not a drop, and no bodies were ever found." Davis felt a chill move through him. "Why didn't anyone follow up?" Vernon laughed bitterly. "Because nobody wanted to believe it was something else. Just like now." Later that evening, Davis returned to his search and finally unearthed something he hadn't seen before: a small, unmarked envelope tucked behind the frame of a faded group photo. Inside was a print from 1989 showing a group of medical personnel posing in front of a field hospital. Most faces were unknown to him, but one woman stood out. Tall, strong posture, a kindness in her eyes beneath a hardened edge. It was unmistakably Sister Angela, but not in her habit. In the picture, she wore military fatigues. A name tag read, A. Ridgewell. Davis stared, stunned. He hadn't known her surname. He flipped the photo over and read the scrawl on the back: Camp Elmsworth, Fort Ord, 1989. Curious and unsettled, Davis contacted an old friend from his seminary days, now working with the Department of Veteran Affairs. A few days later, a file arrived via secure fax, its contents sparse but telling. Angela Ridgewell had served as a combat medic during a peacekeeping mission overseas. Official records listed her discharge as honorable, but an attached note referenced an internal investigation related to a soldier's unexplained death on base. A Private Calvin Reams found dead in the infirmary under uncertain medical oversight. No charges were filed. The case had been quietly closed. Davis felt the weight of it settle into his chest. Sister Angela had carried more than faith with her. She had brought secrets. He told Darnell, who simply nodded. "You don't leave a place like that without scars," he said. Maybe she thought she could outrun them here. But the revelation raised new questions. Had someone from her past followed her? Or worse, had she gone to Tranquillum to confront something she'd seen before? Lee, digging through newspaper microfilm archives at the regional library, found a clipping from 1997. Local search for missing youth mission abandoned after 4 weeks. No evidence found. The article mentioned a man last seen near the area, described as wearing a red parka. The authorities never linked it to anything sinister, but Lee had caught a footnote. One of the volunteers, a young nurse named Evelyn Morris, had previously reported suspicious behavior at a mountain retreat during a past trip. Her report had gone missing. Back in Pine Creek, Darnell walked the trail behind the old schoolhouse when a voice stopped him. An old hunter, thin as a rail and smelling of pipe smoke, leaned against a rusted truck. "You're looking for that place?" he said. Darnell didn't answer. The man nodded toward the west. "It's still there, you know, the sanctuary. Saw it once. Learned to hide better." Darnell stared at him. "Why are you telling me this?" The man lit his pipe. "Because they're not the first, and if you're not careful, they won't be the last." The connection between the 1997 disappearance, Sister Angela's past, and the Tranquillum grounds formed a net tightening around Pine Creek's long-ignored undercurrents. Darnell, though still unofficial, had regained trust among his closest deputies, and with Lee and Father Davis providing evidence, he now had enough to justify reopening certain lines of inquiry. Quietly, strategically, he started with the van. Officially impounded and examined for finger trace and trace evidence weeks ago, it had yielded little of immediate value. But one detail had gone unexamined until a young rookie technician from the state unit, temporarily assigned to assist with mounting paperwork, noticed an anomaly in the van's fuse panel. Tucked behind the radio circuitry was a small black module, not factory standard. Curious, the tech pulled it and found a miniature GPS tracking device, still faintly blinking with battery life. It wasn't state-issued, nor part of any church system. It had been planted there deliberately, and not by the sisters. The GPS was sent to a forensic lab, and within 48 hours, the last registered signal pinged back with coordinates that landed west of the ridge, across the creek, past the dense pine, and over the summit of what locals called Morrow's Edge. There, sitting squat against the curve of a forgotten logging trail, was an old warehouse, once a storage hub for the Forestry Service, long abandoned after digesturally unsound. No one had mentioned it in any of the previous search sweeps, likely because its position didn't align with official topographic routes. But it was within the path marked on the Tranquillum map found in the torn canvas bag. Darnell, Lee, and Deputy Colton approached the structure early one foggy morning, armed with a quiet warrant and enough unease to fill the woods. The warehouse looked dead, roof sagging, door chained, windows long shattered, but as they cut the lock and stepped inside, the air shifted. Dust moved in swirls, and the scent of mildew hung thick. Rodents scattered into shadows. The interior was mostly empty, just crates, rusted shelving, and broken filing cabinets tipped on their side. But in the far west corner, beneath a tarp and behind a stack of rotting lumber, sat a single object. A wooden chest, no larger than a steamer trunk, padlocked but brittle with age. Colton forced it open with a crowbar. Inside lay a photo album, black leather cover, edges curled, its surface stained from time. No names adorned it, no label, just quiet menace. Lee opened it carefully. The first page held a photo of a group of 6 young people in matching t-shirts, smiling in front of a sign that read, "Hearts in Action, Outreach 2008. The next page, another group, different year. Then another. Dozens of pages, each with a similar layout, group photos of volunteer teams, missionary youth camps, service trips. Some images were faded, others newer, or featured bright faces, posed in the same clearing, in front of the same wooden cross, set against trees. But with each turn, a pattern emerged. On several photos, small red circles had been drawn around individual faces. Some circled once, others twice. Lee's stomach turned. "These people," she whispered, "they're all missing." Darnell nodded grimly. He'd seen a few of those faces in old case files, unresolved, marked cold. "This isn't just record-keeping," he muttered. "This is selection." In the back sleeve of the album was a folded sheet of paper, a list, names, dates, and what appeared to be statuses. Integrated, released, silenced, only 3 names bore the words "returned." The rest were either crossed out or followed by long dashes. At the bottom of the page was a scribbled note in faint pencil. Witnesses must never outnumber believers. They returned to town and laid everything out in Davis's office. The former priest, the journalist, and the displaced sheriff formed an unlikely alliance, staring at the grotesque registry that had sat quietly in the mountains for over a decade. Lee began matching names from the album with public missing persons databases. The matches were staggering. One woman last seen in Missouri in 2010, another from Georgia in 2015, a group of 3 teens from a Colorado youth ministry in 2018. No links ever drawn until now. Darnell picked up the GPS device again, turning it in his palm. "Someone was watching them," he said. "Not just following, but monitoring. They knew exactly when to intercept the sisters." Lee looked up. "And they've done it before. At least 15 years' worth." Father Davis sat in silence, fingers folded beneath his chin. "Why keep the album?" he finally asked. "Risk it being found?" No one answered. That evening, Colton returned to the warehouse with a larger team to process the scene officially. But when they arrived, the structure was ablaze. Flames poured from the roof, licking the trees above. No one had seen who set it. No vehicles were reported. The fire consumed everything, wood, paper, evidence, until only ash and twisted metal remained. The album was gone, the list, destroyed, but the photos Lee had copied onto her phone and the scans they had made in Davis's office remained. In the days following the warehouse fire, tension in Pine Creek thickened. Though the original photos and digital copies survived, the destruction of the album sent a clear message. Someone was watching, and they were willing to erase traces without hesitation. Lee continued cataloging each face from the scorched registry, while Darnell grew more cautious, his instincts sharpening. Every lead, every connection, pointed west, always back toward the same untamed stretch of mountain that seemed to swallow the curious whole. Then, on a gray Thursday morning, the story changed again. A man walked into the sheriff's office, unkempt, hollow-eyed, clothes worn thin from weather. He carried no bag, gave no last name, just a quiet introduction. "I was with the 2009 mission team, the one that disappeared." Darnell froze. The man's voice was gravel, like it hadn't been used in years. "Name's Adam Sloan. I don't expect you to believe me, but I know what's out there." They took him into the back room. Lee recorded the conversation with his consent. Sloan spoke slowly, hands trembling, eyes rarely meeting theirs. He described a familiar path, how their group of 8 had planned a 1-week charity trip to rebuild cabins for displaced locals. How they'd ventured too far west after being invited to visit a small community said to reside beyond the marked trails. They called themselves the Fold, he explained. Not in a cult way, not at first, just quiet people, separate, didn't like phones, said the world outside had corrupted language, poisoned worship. The Fold lived deep in the forest, within hand-built homes and a central gathering house. No electricity, no roads, children were schooled in scripture. Outsiders, they claimed, were allowed in, but not out. August didn't know that last part until it was too late, Sloan said. They welcomed us, asked us to help repair a roof, said we could sleep there, join their evening prayer, but when we asked to leave, things changed. He recounted how 3 members tried to slip out before dawn. 2 never returned. 1 came back beaten, silent, never speaking again. Sloan said they were told the Fold's greatest fear was contamination, outside ideology, especially faiths not their own. They don't follow any known branch of Christianity, he said. They believe the world ended long ago. That they were chosen to remain behind scriptures is a threat. Lee leaned forward. How did you escape? Sloan hesitated. A woman there took pity on me, said I reminded her of her son, gave me food, told me which trails were less watched. I ran for 2 nights, never stopped. He'd been hiding since, moving between towns, never staying long, convinced someone from the Fold was always close behind. I saw the van on the news, he whispered, saw the names. When I heard it was Nuns, I knew what happened. They brought the wrong truth to the wrong place. Darnell glanced at Lee, then back to Sloan. Do you know where they are? Sloan nodded. If they're alive, they're with the Fold. If not, they were seen as a threat. That's how it works out there. Sloan drew a rough sketch on a legal pad, marking trails not listed on any official map, routes bypassing ravines and leading into a shadowed valley encircled by cliffs. There's a chapel carved into stone, he said. Looks ancient. They gather there, that's where they keep the guests. At first it's kindness, then it's re-education, then silence. Lay's hands trembled as she recorded every word. Hasn't anyone done anything? She asked. Sloan exhaled slowly. Because they erase everything. The Fold has existed for decades. They blend into the mountain. Their elders were survivalists, religious purists. They think the modern world is Babel reborn. To them, every outsider is a test. And most fail. Father Davis listened in silence, his eyes haunted. He asked only one question. Did they let you go? Or did you run? Sloan answered without looking up. Both. 3 days after Adam Sloan's revelation, as law enforcement debated whether they had jurisdiction to move on a hidden religious community deep in untamed state land, the investigation took a turn no one anticipated. The call came just after dawn, routed through the diocese line, where a young administrative assistant barely understood the voice on the other end. I need to speak to Father Davis, the caller said. Tell him it's Sister Claire. Please, tell him I remember now. The girl on the phone stammered, thinking it was a prank. After all, Sister Claire had been missing for over 7 months, declared presumed dead after extensive but fruitless searches. But the voice on the line didn't wait for disbelief. She gave the name of the hospital, St. Luke's Medical Center, Wichita, Kansas. Then she hung up. Within hours, Davis, Darnell, and Lee were en route, crossing state lines with the weight of impossible hope pressing down on their shoulders. They found Sister Claire in a modest recovery ward, wearing a hospital gown, hair cropped short from treatment, eyes distant but clear. Her chart said she'd been admitted as a Jane Doe nearly 4 months prior, found disoriented and injured in a county ditch outside Augusta. No ID, no Emory. Concussion, dehydration, minor fractures, malnourishment. Her vitals stabilized over time, but her mind stayed dark, until this week, when she woke from a fevered sleep and asked for a rosary. That's when pieces began to return. She sat up slowly as they entered. Father Davis clutched her hand in silence, tears unashamed on his face. Claire offered a faint smile, but wasted no time. They took us, she said. The man in the red coat told us there were families in need. He was gentle, persuasive. We followed willingly. There was no van, no abduction. We believed we were helping. But once we crossed the ridge, we never came back. She described the place as a compound of silence and control. Wooden cabins, one central gathering house, and a hierarchy that operated like clockwork. They were stripped of their habits, renamed by numbers, and assigned tasks: woodcutting, water hauling, cooking in silence. Days were rigid, dictated by bells. Scripture was read daily, but it wasn't theirs. It was rewritten, layered with phrases foreign to any Catholic doctrine. They called it the Fold's Gospel, she said. It taught submission, purity through labor, silence as salvation. Claire paused, collecting strength. We weren't beaten, but we weren't free. There were rules, no eye contact, no questions, and above all, no asking about the outside. Darnell leaned forward. What about the others? Her eyes welled. Angela tried to reason with them, said she was a nurse, could help their sick. They separated her the second week. We never saw her again. Lee swallowed hard. Did anyone try to escape? Claire nodded. Fiona and Marianne made a plan with me. One night, during rain, we were to scatter, head for the hills, find the stream bed, follow it east. But only I made it to the outer fence. Something hit me. Hard. I remember pain, falling... Then nothing. Woke up here. She touched her temple. They must have thought I was dead or not worth treating. The room went still. Father Davis whispered, You survived. Claire nodded. By grace. But they won't stop. They think we're pollution, agents of false doctrine. They don't kill with guns, they erase. Darnell rose, face hardening. That's enough. We have enough. But Lee held up a hand. Did you ever hear their real names? Who ran the fold? Claire looked down. No one used names, only titles. Keepers. The man who brought us. They called him? No one used name. He remembered the name from Sloane's story, and from old county records. The shepherd, believed to be Martin Field's assumed identity. A man erased from legal trace, but etched deep in the bones of the region. As they left the hospital, Claire gripped Davis's hand tightly. Promise me, she whispered, you won't let them vanish again. Outside, the wind had picked up. In the distance, clouds rolled over the western hills. Darnell checked his phone. No signal. 2 weeks after Sister Claire's return, Pine Creek no longer resembled itself. Barricades were erected at key trailheads, and FBI mobile units joined state troopers in what the official press release called a large-scale investigation into human trafficking and unlawful religious detainment. But those involved, the ones who had walked through those woods, who had looked into the eyes of survivors, knew it wasn't trafficking in the conventional sense. It was spiritual control twisted into something unrecognizable, all cloaked beneath the facade of holiness. The raid was meticulously planned. Armed with maps drawn by Sloane and Sister Claire's recollections, a joint team hiked over Morrow's Edge at dawn, guided by satellite imagery and scent-tracking dogs. For hours, the search turned up nothing. Then, near the base of a steep hill marked with 2 pine trees bent in opposite directions, a symbol Claire had mentioned, they found it. A shallow basin camouflaged by brush and moss, with flat stones aligned in rows like crude headstones. No names, no markers, just silence. The forensics team moved slowly. The soil was recently disturbed, not deeply packed. Within hours, 7 bodies were unearthed, each in individual shallow graves. 4 were female, 2 male, and 1 too decomposed to determine. All bore no immediate signs of trauma, no gunshot wounds, no ligature marks, no visible breaks, but the medical examiner confirmed what Darnell already feared. They had not died of natural causes. Some showed signs of extreme fatigue, others early organ failure consistent with dehydration and untreated infection. None wore a rusted crucifix, identical to the one Sister Angela used to wear. Father Davis stood at the edge of the clearing, hat in hand, lips murmuring prayers over the open earth. They were meant to serve, he whispered, not to disappear. Simultaneously, agents breached the central structure of the fold, a main gathering hall hidden behind a ridge wall, its entrance masked with felled trees and woven vines. The space was cavernous, built with skill but devoid of electricity or plumbing. Inside were hand-drawn murals depicting scenes from an unrecognizable gospel, salvation through silence, purity through surrender, isolation as grace. Most members were compliant, eyes glazed with resignation. A few fled into the woods. Dozens of men, women, and children were removed, processed, and given emergency care. But the one man they wanted, the shepherd, was gone. He had vanished hours before the raid, his personal quarters abandoned, the bed untouched, the stove still warm. The only clue left behind was a letter addressed a los buscadores, written in looping Spanish cursive on yellowing parchment. Translated, it read, "Not everyone is worthy of the light that faith reveals. Some recoil from it, some bleed, others turn blind. You think we have taken them? We have only shown them truth. They chose their path, they walked willingly, and you bring them back to darkness." It was signed with a single name. The press exploded. National outlets covered the raid as a cult takedown. Analysts debated the legality of autonomous spiritual communities. But no one, except those in Pine Creek, understood what had really been lost. Funerals were held for the unnamed. Sister Claire spoke at a closed service attended by the families of the missing. "Faith is not meant to imprison," she said, voice clear despite the strain. "It's meant to liberate, and if it silences your voice, if it takes your name, it is no longer sacred." Of the other sisters, only 2 bodies were confirmed through dental records. The rest were presumed to be among the buried. Some families held out hope, others found closure in finality. Play published a full exposé, sparing no detail. The story ignited public inquiry into remote missionary programs and sparked new legislation on background checks for faith-based outreach. Darnell, reinstated quietly after the operation, declined most interviews. He retired 6 months later, moving north to be closer to his grandchildren. He still kept a copy of the shepherd's letter in a locked drawer, unread but never destroyed. Father Davis remained at the parish, rebuilding slowly, preaching now with a different edge in his voice. Sharper, hungrier, aware of how faith, unchecked, can become a weapon. Sister Claire returned to a convent in Illinois, rarely seen in public, her hair now silver, her posture straighter than ever. The fold was dismantled, the land reclaimed by the state, but whispers remained. Locals said they sometimes heard bells in the woods at dusk, faint chants with no source. A superstition, perhaps, or memory trying to breathe. In the final report submitted to the Department of Justice, beneath the forensic summary, one line had been underlined in red. All graves appear intentional, no evidence of struggle. Consent unclear. If this story pulled you in, don't forget to like and subscribe for more mysteries just like this. Which moment shook you the most? And where in the world are you watching from? Drop your thoughts and location in the comments. We're reading every single one.